Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ismail, we're going to stick to the topic of culture, and I'm going to ask you to begin with about two different branches and your experiences in respect of those. Starting with Wibsey Bank branch, at paragraph 51 of your witness statement, you told the inquiry that after your election, you visited branches to get feedback, and one of those branches was a postmaster from Wibsey Bank, and they gave you some feedback. Can you expand upon that, please?
Yes, so once I had been elected, for me to understand feedback from a wide range of postmasters, it was very important that I could relate and ensure I understood what rural postmasters wanted, high street postmasters, and town centre, different types of branches, strategic partners also. Hence, I organised a visit with my own initiative to Bradford, and I was accompanied by the area manager, Mel Shepherd, and we visited a postmaster at Wibsey Bank. We had an interesting conversation, and what he advised me was, if I ask you to do something, will you do this for me? I said, it depends what it is. What are you thinking? And he said, when you go back to board, when you speak to the wider executive, when you speak to the powers that be within this organisation, tell them, we're not animals, we're postmasters. Please treat us fairly. And that was a comment and a quotation that I ensured I mentioned at several board meetings and to individuals on the wider executive. And what was very disappointing was I didn't see any urgency, any interest, unfortunately, in addressing the specific postmaster or the issues that may be affecting them or concerning them. And for me, and I've mentioned this in my statement, in 2018, I lost a close friend who was also a postmaster at the main town centre office in Preston, and he was one of the few individuals who practically held my hand when I first became a postmaster. And the business did nothing. The business wasn't even interested, to a point at which, on the day of his funeral, nobody from the post office attended. He was an active postmaster. And there was, at one point, one of the staff members I spoke to actually said to me, well, I can't attend, it's my day off. I've got annual leave. And from seeing that in 2018, that was one of my motivations to try and make a difference. Hence why I wanted to see, have things actually changed? Do postmasters feel differently? And then to hear what I did at Wibsey Bank, it was tough, but I knew what my starting point was to try and ensure I can make a difference to this organisation.
And moving on to another branch, the Yateley branch, you've described at paragraph 207 onwards in your witness statement an issue with that particular branch. Can you tell us about that?
I was in shock. I was stunned to learn about the situation that occurred in this branch, and the voice of the postmaster group, an individual called Brent, who forwarded an email to me that had been raised by this postmistress, and she's again an active postmistress who was working at the Yateley branch with her husband, and he died all of a sudden overnight. And in trying, this business should be helping postmasters. What they put her through, the conversations that I had with her, she was in tears while she was talking to me. And
What was the specific problem that she faced when her husband passed away?
So her husband was the postmaster, and as a business, we cancelled the contract within 10 days, and we gave her no justification for that. Instead, we provided data that was very difficult for her to understand. She was grieving, and the post office cancelled her contract, made her life more difficult. And what was really upsetting, and this is a cultural test within the organisation at that point for me, this was a really important cultural test. This case passed at least 10 individuals within the organisation. None of them took accountability. And the only point at which something started to happen was when it came to me. And I then had conversations with Tracy Marshall. I also had conversations with Nick Reed, and to be fair to Nick Reed and credit to him, I said, Nick, you need to have a conversation because she's not happy. This is what we've done. And Nick made time that very day and called her. So moving forward, in order to help her be in a position to still be able to operate, I then had to reach out to Martin Edwards and Paul Lydiard, who were fantastic in assisting this postmaster so she could still stay open. Her business should have been the least of her worries. The funeral of her husband hadn't even happened yet, and the post office was creating another major issue and obstacle for her to go through, unfortunately.
I'd like to look at some correspondence. Could we please turn to poll 00448 please? This is an email of the 4th of July 2023. Was this before or after it had been raised internally with, we see Nick Reed is copied into this email?
This is after that's happened. So once her world's been torn apart, and she felt very vulnerable, this postmistress, may I add. And what the business then did, and this was part of a strategy called drop and collect. And what happened was, and this wasn't specifically just for this postmistress, the post office, in order to comply with the 11,500 requirement that government has set for branches, has a drop and collect strategy, which came to the strategy day in 21 and 22. Now, there was challenged by myself and Elliot because the radius wanted to be reduced, and we also put other conditions down, and the other conditions were ignored, and the 0.5 radius was used in order to ensure we hit 11,500. So what's happened in this scenario, hence the email, was the Yateley postmistress has had a customer coming in, informing her, why is the post office opening another branch down the road? I thought after what you've been through, I thought you were struggling. That's what the conversation we had. And she didn't know. She then contacted her area manager, who also said they didn't know. And unfortunately, with the drop and collect strategy, this was very, very common. Postmasters finding out by surprise that they wouldn't necessarily be informed, unfortunately. And like I said, neither would the area managers.
So that's the opening up of branches near existing branches?
Yes, to meet the 11,500 criteria, the government.
So that's 11,500 branches?
Yes.
And you say here, I'm extremely disappointed after everything this postmistress has been through. We've put this communication out without informing her. This is unacceptable, and she's fuming, as it was shown to her by a customer. The number of issues this postmistress has been through shows we've still a very long way to go as a business. We need to ask some serious questions about our organisation and our people. Are we really changing the culture within the organisation? Are we trying to be postmaster-centric? And I'd like to take you to the attachment, so that's the announcement or the communication. We can find that at poll 00448. can zoom in. Thank you very much. I'll just read a couple of passages from it. It says, "Dear customer, we're writing to inform you that for reasons beyond our control, Yateley Post Office had to close on Thursday, the 8th of June 2023, and it reopened on Tuesday, the 13th of June 2023. The post office is temporarily operating on reduced hours from Monday to Friday." And then in the next paragraph it says, "Additionally, the outreach services at Datchet, Crowthorne and Tudor Drive Outreach, operated by the postmaster from Yateley Post Office, ceased from Wednesday, the 21st of June 2023. Please accept my apologies for the late notification on this occasion. We have completed a review of the service provision in Datchet, Crowthorne and Tudor Drive, and currently we're not looking to open a replacement service at this time." Is this the correspondence that was being referred to?
No.
No, this is a separate communication.
This correspondence was once the postmaster had passed away, in order to meet customer expectations, this was the correspondence to inform day-to-day customers about what's been going on.
So there are two separate issues there. The one that you referred to,
Yes.
which was the opening up of the branch, and this was the original correspondence
Yes.
following the passing of her husband, which refers to her branch having to close for reasons beyond the post office's control.
Yes. The other correspondence for the drop and collect would be different.
Thank you.
Yes.
And what was your view of this particular notification?
It's what we had to do in order to inform customers. I think it's fine. Maybe it's a bit overcomplicated for customers. I would have expected it to be simpler, but there's a lot that the business needs to learn about communication.
If we scroll down on this particular communication, it's from somebody called Graham Brander. Are you aware of Mr. Brander's involvement in this matter?
No.
Are you aware that Mr. Brander was a witness in phase 4 of the inquiry and had been involved in the investigations of Joe Hamilton, Julian Wilson and Lynette Hutchings?
No. This goes back to the point, sorry, to clarify what I raised yesterday. Redeployment, recycling, rejoining the gravy train, it's just not helpful. And again, I should have been aware, but I've never been told until today.
Mr. Brander was somebody who left the post office and was rehired in 2019. Were you aware of that or that process?
No, there's never been any specific communication to the board of who had left the business, what terms they've left the business on, and why they've been rehired. We've never ever actually been given that from legal, HR, the people team.
And seeing that and knowing now what you know, does that in any way affect your views of the Yateley issue?
Highly inappropriate. He should not have been involved. And if I had known this at the time, I would have definitely raised that.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to the topic.
Sorry, just one other point.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not sure even the postmistress at this branch is aware, because if they were, I'm sure they would have raised it with me.
I'm going to move on to the topic of prosecutions and investigations. Paragraph 43 of your witness statement, you've said that you received minimal and cursory information regarding ongoing issues that the post office has been dealing with. Can you briefly assist us with that, with your views on that?
So, as part of my submission, I've included board decks from the beginning of my tenure as an NED, and some of these decks were 811 pages, and some of the decks included cases like Joe Hamilton, Bates, Lee Castleton, and as an economics graduate, for me to appraise data, commercials, figures, no problem. All day long I can do that. But I'm not a lawyer. And not many people on the board are lawyers. So I don't think the business did enough to equip NEDs and other individuals on the wider executive who are also not lawyers to be able to appraise documents effectively.
If we look at a slide pack, I think, from your initial training, it can be found at POL 00448-401. This appears to be a page from a UKGI training presentation, is that right?
Yes.
And we see there are a few bullet points at the bottom addressing the historic shortfall scheme, the post office IT inquiry, and convicted postmasters. Did you receive any significant training or background information on those issues when you first joined?
No. And just to give you a bit more context, I think looking back now from my observations at the time, that there was an understanding within the wider executive and the board that everybody knew about these issues, and everybody doesn't. Not many customers were even aware until the ITV drama. So in hindsight, yeah, there should have been better training, but it was a very high level overview of what we were provided.
Thank you, that can come down. On investigations policy, I'd like to look at a document that relates to Project Birch. Could we please turn to POL 00423-697, please? This is a KPMG review of the Post Office's current investigations process, and it's dated the 13th of August 2021, so shortly after your appointment as a non-executive director. Do you recall being provided with a copy of this?
No, it was in the bundle that you sent me, but I don't remember seeing this.
And you don't remember any significant discussion about its contents?
No.
Could we please turn to page 10? And we can see some of the executive summary. I'll just take you to some of the key points. There's a current state assessment. It says the Post Office's decentralised model provides individual business teams with the independence to develop their own investigations framework. However, there is limited central oversight over these frameworks and the policies and processes that have been adopted by individual business teams. Whilst this model utilises the experience and expertise of staff within the business teams, it means across the Post Office there is no overarching consistency over how investigations are undertaken, the experience and qualifications of the investigators, the application of investigation minimum standards, especially in relation to high-risk cases, and the recording and reporting of investigations data. The final paragraph at the bottom there says, currently, investigations are often undertaken within the Post Office from a contractual perspective, and there is little consideration at the start of an investigation as to whether it could potentially result in criminal, civil, or disciplinary proceedings. Early engagement with the Post Office legal would enable proper consideration of criminal or civil standards or consideration of when to liaise with, I think that's law enforcement agencies. It then says, in addition, there's no overall central monitoring of the investigation process and no visibility over the overall investigations population. As a result, the Post Office have no comprehensive analysis over the number or type of investigations it undertakes, including those that are high risk. And then it sets out some issues with governance and process. The first, investigations are not conducted consistently across the Post Office. If we turn over the page, we see some more points in bold. Lack of overarching governance and oversight over high-risk investigations. No clear, consistent triage process. Lack of consistent monitoring and reporting over all investigations. There is no consistent approach to quality assurance across the business teams. There is limited evidence of lessons learnt and continuous improvement arising from investigations across the Post Office. Over the page, please. Business teams often use area managers and line managers to conduct investigations. There is a lack of training in respect of investigations across the post office. There is no consistent use of an investigations case management tool across the post office. Were you aware, or were these matters brought to your attention when you joined the board or shortly thereafter?
No. The investigations into postmasters are treated differently from what I've observed, and the investigations into the wider executive are treated differently. In April 24, when I raised concerns into the investigations into the CEO, the response I got from Amanda Burton was the investigation. I asked for very, very simple parts of information, which was what's the cost of the investigation and what were the instructions. And till today, Amanda's never given that to me, which was really disappointing. And she confirmed in email the approach was more about protecting the CEO, which I was disappointed, because when it comes to a postmaster, as we've seen in the past, and as we spoke about yesterday, the approach is very, very different. Postmasters can be suspended either. And when it came to this specific document, as I've said, I would have expected this to be brought to board, and I would have expected some kind of benchmarking in terms of where we were in our approach to try and ensure we did what the report said. But you don't know what you don't know, hence why I couldn't challenge this, because I wasn't aware of it, unfortunately.
So having sat on the board when this was produced and subsequently, are you not aware of any significant discussion in that respect, in respect of those bullet points, for example?
No.
Could we please turn to poll 00448,320? This is a report to the board of September 2022, so a year later. And this is entitled Post Office Investigations Next Steps. And this is addressing what's going to happen in respect of prosecutions of individuals and the relationship with Post Office Investigations team. If we scroll down, we can see under the executive summary, it talks about how the Central Investigations Unit will be staffed. And it's the bottom bullet point that I'd like to ask you about. It says, Post Office has no appetite to pursue private prosecutions. However, it is proposed that Post Office investigators conduct investigations into suspected criminality and to report what has been evidenced to law enforcement and prosecutors in all 4 nations of the UK. The rationale being to act as a deterrent and to seek financial restitution through the independent and external criminal justice system. Do you recall receiving this particular paper for the board?
Not specifically, no.
No. Do you remember discussions about Post Office investigators conducting investigations into suspected criminality and reporting thereafter to law enforcement?
No. And this is another example of there's so much that's brought to the board. This should be a key issue, and it shouldn't be for noting, as the paper says at the top. This should have been a discussion.
If we scroll up, we see their input source, and it's a noting paper.
That's unacceptable. This should have been a discussion. And it's, again, getting lost in the noise because of how much information is brought to board, unfortunately.
If we could turn, please, to page 4. We see the recommendation there at 2.4. It's sorry, if we could just scroll up slightly so we still have that table. Thank you. It says, it is our recommendation that the minimum remit of the investigation function is option 4. And if we look at the table above, option 4 is investigations into post office and post office staff, postmasters and postmasters staff. So it includes postmasters staff. This would allow the Post Office to act in determining facts relating to situations ranging from allegations of theft or fraud by postmasters and or their staff using/misusing Post Office systems or functions where either or both Post Office and the postmasters are victims. Just pausing there, in respect of the issue of victims and the Post Office and whether it is a victim or not, is that the kind of language that you've seen being used in Post Office documents?
I've seen it being used in the documents that were presented to me with in the bundle for my evidence. But prior to that, I was not cited on them documents.
And we'll look at those documents shortly. Though through to misconduct or process failings in the Post Office and subsidiaries, the Horizon issue identified a failure to investigate beyond the postmaster in determining culpability. Best practice, and in some situations law, requires that all reasonable lines of inquiry to be followed, whether they point away or towards the considered investigative hypothesis, as it is the truth that is sought, not that a case is to be made against a selected individual. By investigating wider than the postmasters, and it then says, for example, their staff, when relevant, we demonstrate that the Post Office has learnt from the past and we should seek to determine actual culpability, if any, which is treating the postmasters fairly. It's that reference there to, for example, their staff when relevant that I wanted to ask you about. Are you aware of any discussions taking place about the extent to which the investigation should also look at the actual underlying systems, so the Horizon system?
No. When I had my discussion in October 23 with JB and Sarah Gray, there was no mention of the integrity of Horizon, and it was a case of trying to work, trying to see what's actually going on, maybe trying to be a bit fairer to postmasters, and there were some prosecutions that happened due to the postmaster being responsible, but it was their team or their staff members as a result, and that was the discussion that we had. And like I said yesterday, I did want to follow that up to get the tonality right, and that never happened. But for me, looking at this document, if the business wanted to learn from the past, there's a line, where's it gone? So I think the starting point should have been for the entire investigation element to be external. That's how you learn from the past. I don't, from my observations, what I've seen, discussions with postmasters, I'm not sure this business can control investigations, and investigators. Hence why from my perspective, the right solution would be to have an external third party deal with all of that.
If we turn, please, to page 6. We see there at the top, it says, this paper asks board to note that the Central Investigations Unit staff are to conduct criminal investigations within the investigation branch's remit and report these matters to the police when appropriate and in accordance with the CLEP. As you said, it was a noting paper and you don't recall any particular discussion about that at board?
No.
What is your view as to whether the investigators or even whether sub-postmasters have access to sufficient information in respect of investigations?
So again, from what I have seen and my discussions with postmasters, they are provided with data and it's very difficult to understand that data. Horizon is very complex, and translating that data into some form to conduct an investigation is a challenge. But then being a normal postmaster and having to understand the way it's written to defend yourself again is equally difficult. And again, from discussions that I've had with individuals, there is very limited visibility in terms of investigations and material given. Previously, and very recently, should I say, individuals were not allowed a legal representative. And thanks to myself and Mr. Jacobs, we've pushed hard, and now individuals are allowed to have a legal representative. It's unfair, it's unhelpful, and when the business has got a starting point of defending itself and not a neutral position, I think it's grossly unfair. We did challenge the investigations late last year. Have you got the correspondence for that?
We will probably get to that in due course.
Fine.
This particular board report that we just looked at was from September 2022.
Okay.
You have said in your evidence, and you've said in your witness statement, that it wasn't until after the ITV drama that a number of board members told you that they hadn't understood properly the impact on sub-postmasters and how they have been treated. Can you give us some examples of those kinds of conversations that you had?
So the January board meeting is something I don't think I'll be able to ever forget. It was a cultural awakening for some of the board members. The ITV drama had happened, and the executive team, some of the executive team, should I say, came to that board meeting, and it started with a discussion on the ITV drama. And one of the individuals who mentioned how he received threats that his children, people hoped his children would commit suicide. It was very disappointing. The CEO received death threats. There were so many things going on. However, the board acknowledged that they should have done more to support the wider executive, and that was a mistake on our part. Hands up, no problem. However, individuals on the board and some of the discussions that took place, some people thought it was a dramatization, what ITV did. However, myself and Mr. Jacobs at the board meeting were pretty clear that this is the reality. This is what sub-postmasters go through, and the tonality, the way ITV delivered an exceptional piece was bang on.
Were your views taken on board in that respect?
I expressed them. I'm not sure if board members did, but I definitely expressed them. And nothing's happened for me to be able to say, or some kind of a test in terms of, okay, they definitely took it on board. I'm sure they heard what I had to say and what Mr. Jacobs had to say.
Were any contrary views expressed at that meeting?
No, not that I can recall, no.
Sticking with investigations and criminal investigations, can we please turn to poll 00448-616? We're still in the same period. We're now on the 4th of January at the bottom of this page into the next page. So that's during the time of the Bates drama. I think it may have finished perhaps that day. If we scroll down, please, thank you. At the bottom of this page into the next. It's an email from yourself to Mr. Bartlett. So Mr. Bartlett was the head of the investigations team or the Central Investigations Unit.
Yeah, he's an ex-police officer, and he's the individual responsible.
And you say, I was hoping to visit your team in Chesterfield. Does that work for you? Can you give us a bit of background? Why is it that you were hoping to visit his team in Chesterfield?
For me, watching the ITV drama, obviously knowing what's happened in the past and trying to get it right, I felt that was my duty as a postmaster NED, for me to ensure the organisation is run properly, and this was a major issue that needed to be resolved. And it was, again, building on the conversation that we had, just to try and help put the business in a better place.
If we scroll up, please, we can see he responded to say, unfortunately, my team is dispersed all over the country and is not based at Chesterfield. We do sometimes go to Chesterfield for training days, etc. So I'll let you know when the next session will be. Alternatively, if you're happy to speak to the team on Teams, then we can organise that very easily. It would be good to speak to you in the team, so thank you for offering to do this. And then if we scroll up, that's the 4th of January. The top email, I know it says the 1st of the 6th, but I think that's actually the 6th of January. Is that right?
Yeah.
And it says, thank you for your email. I'm happy to work with your suggestions, and maybe it's better to speak to the new team members early Feb. Also, I'm happy to speak to them in person, when your team are in Chesterfield. Let me know the dates several weeks in advance, please. And then you say, lastly, did you have a think about our discussions regarding investigations team when we spoke at Wood Street? Can you assist us? What was the discussion at Wood Street?
As I said yesterday, it was trying to get the tonality right of what they are doing, getting postmasters involved to ensure the investigations team is in the right place. And watching the documentary and seeing how people were treated, how postmasters were treated, I felt morally it was my duty to try and get this in the right place.
So you had raised it with Mr. Bartlett. That was a drinks reception or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, in October 23 with Mr. Bartlett and with Sarah Gray.
Yeah. And was there a response to this request?
No.
Do you know why not? Was there a discussion at all?
No.
I'm going to turn to some correspondence relating to a criminal investigation. Could we please turn to FUJ 00243203? Could we please turn to page 3? This is correspondence between the post office and Fujitsu relating to an ongoing police investigation. It's sent. This email is sent by Simon Oldnell. Do you know Mr. Oldnell at all?
Yes.
He's there as the Horizon IT director.
Yes.
So he's not part of the investigations team.
No.
He has emailed Daniel Walton, who is the head of the post office account at Fujitsu, so perhaps his counterpart at Fujitsu. And he says, I understand from John, and that's Mr. Bartlett, that there have been some challenges with supporting an ongoing police investigation that involves a large sum of money. I obviously understand broader context, but wanted to reassure that the post office is supporting the police investigation and offering any and all assistance we can. Can I ask that you help with any conversation that the City of London Police need to have with Fujitsu Services Limited? If we scroll up, we can see a response from Mr. Walton of Fujitsu. He says, as this is a legal matter, Fujitsu Legal are communicating with the City of London Police. I'm not involved in these communications, and in any event, Fujitsu considers it to be inappropriate for Post Office and Fujitsu to be discussing a police investigation. If we scroll, please, onto the first page. The response from Mr. Bartlett. Just before we get to this response, were you aware of this issue at this particular time?
No.
the response, Mr. Bartlett, is as follows. One of my team has gone back to City of London Police to see how the contact you referenced below was progressing, as we have an open and objective engagement with the City of London Police on this matter. City of London Police has informed us that they have not had any additional information nor contact with Fujitsu after the single exploratory and inconclusive conversation. They left the conversation with the feeling that they were indirectly being told that the Horizon system was unreliable, and so the case could not progress. We really need to explore this, as this is not the nuanced impression Simon Oldnall has given me. As the potential victim in the case, the Post Office would be grateful if you could provide me with contact details for either the equivalent person in Fujitsu in the UK to my role, i.e. in charge of investigations, or perhaps the head of security if you do not have a dedicated investigations team, or the appropriate person in your UK legal team. I will then pass these details on to the City of London Police, who are looking to have a trilateral conversation with Fujitsu, Post Office and City of London Police. Just before we get to the next paragraph, what is your view in respect of what's said there about Post Office being the potential victim in the case and needing to liaise with Fujitsu?
I feel it reinforces what I've said, which is the starting point of Post Office Limited when it comes to investigations. Hence why I just don't feel it's appropriate for the business to be doing the investigations. And again, I wasn't aware of this until I received it in my bundle.
It then continues, it is impossible to overstate how important this is. I need to advise both the police and the Post Office as to the evidentially established reliability or not of data that is being used every day in establishing outcomes with postmasters and potentially to be presented to the criminal justice system by the police and the 3 public prosecuting agencies. The non-provision of relevant witness statements from the Post Office and Fujitsu will rightly be interpreted by the police and prosecutors as the Post Office and Fujitsu not having faith in the reliability of the data, with the obvious outcome resulting. Look forward to hearing from you, and thank you in advance. Would you expect this kind of an issue to come to the board?
Yes. It's as I've said yesterday, it's this selective and filtering of information that's given to the board, which is really disappointing.
There's then some correspondence between Mr. Patterson, the CEO of Fujitsu Europe, and Mr. Reed, Post Office CEO. Could we please have a look at FUJ 002431199? I'm going to read from this letter. 17th of May 2024. So by this time, had the matter reached the board?
No.
And this is a month later. I'm writing to you directly in order to raise serious concerns that have come to my attention, which indicate that the Post Office continues to pursue enforcement against postmasters, and it expects Fujitsu Services Limited to support such actions. To be clear, Fujitsu will not support the Post Office to act against postmasters. We will not provide support for any enforcement actions taken by the Post Office agent against postmasters, whether civil or criminal, for alleged shortfalls, fraud, or false accounting. And then he addresses 3 topics, in particular criminal investigations. And this is a reference to that particular correspondence that we've just been looking at. We have become aware of a recent investigation by the City of London Police into a Post Office branch. The approach of Fujitsu is to cooperate with the police and any other third party exercising independent investigative, prosecutorial, regulatory, or judicial powers. However, we are concerned by the behaviour of the Post Office investigation team on this matter. That team maintains an approach of Post Office as a victim and requires Fujitsu to provide a witness statement as to the reliability of Horizon data, stating that without such statement, the case will not progress. For the investigations team to act in this matter seemed to disregard the serious criticisms raised in multiple judicial findings and indeed exhibits a lack of respect to the ongoing inquiry. What's your view about what's written there?
I think Fujitsu are right in what they're saying. And I find it disappointing that this was not discussed at board.
Second point, pursuit of shortfalls from postmasters. It seems that Post Office may be continuing to pursue postmasters for shortfalls in their accounts using Horizon data. We would have expected the Post Office has changed its behaviour in light of the criticisms and is appropriately circumspect with respect to any enforcement actions. It should not be relying on Horizon data as the basis for such shortfall enforcement. Next, postmaster redress. Fujitsu recognises that it holds Horizon-related information that may assist postmasters and post office workers to appeal their convictions and/or seek appropriate redress. Over the page, if we look at the final paragraph, he says, based on what I have seen and heard in the inquiry, there is a significant behavioural and cultural aspect to the Horizon scandal. As leaders of our respective organisations, I believe we're both committed to learn the lessons necessary so that this appalling scandal can never be allowed to happen again. Now, there is a response, and we can find that at FUJ 002432201. This is a response from Mr. Reid. Were you consulted about this response?
No.
Are you aware of the board having been consulted about the response?
No, maybe with, as I said yesterday, because the board's tiered, maybe there was a discussion with the more important board members, but certainly not with the board as a whole. And there were discussions with Fujitsu at this time regarding a contract extension. So those discussions definitely took place, but this didn't.
The letter says as follows, 30th of May 2024, I write further to your letter in which you make a number of concerning statements about postmaster enforcement. If we scroll down, the letter says, I would like to reassure you that Post Office has invested significant time and resource affecting cultural and procedural change across the business, taking on board the court's findings and ensuring that our postmasters' interests are central to everything we do. I would be keen to talk to you further about these changes, as it appears from your letter that there are some fundamental misunderstandings at Fujitsu about Post Office's current day culture and activities. He then addresses each of the points. Criminal investigations, he says, I can reassure you that Post Office is not now and will not be in the future undertaking any prosecutions against postmasters or any third parties as the prosecuting body. Over the page, please, thank you. He says, in respect of enforcement, Post Office requests only relate to cases where our teams are supporting criminal investigations or prosecutions pursued by independent third parties, such as the police or the Crown Prosecution Service. So that's in line with the noting paper that we saw earlier. In response to the specific case you raised, potential criminal activities were identified in the branch, and Post Office therefore reported the matter to the police. We have assisted with the police's investigation, including providing supporting data from the Horizon system. Naturally, it is vital to the police's investigation that it can rely on the Horizon data it has received. I'm happy that you have confirmed in your letter that Fujitsu will cooperate with the police when it is exercising its independent investigative powers, as this case would require a statement from Fujitsu. It is a matter for the police and Fujitsu to determine the necessary content of that statement. He then addresses the other two matters very briefly. Pursuit of shortfalls. He says, as you're aware, civil recovery of losses was stopped by the Post Office in 2018, so Horizon data is not currently being used for civil recoveries. And if we go over the page, we see there the postmaster redress. The reliability of Horizon data is also central to the compensation and redress schemes which Post Office is currently delivering to right the wrongs of the past. I welcome your confirmations that Fujitsu will provide Post Office with information. Do you have any views on that response?
It's disappointing this letter went out the way it did. And I think what this letter quite clearly shows is the lack of control and oversight within this organization, where the CEO is implying a certain point, so we're not prosecuting, but yet you've got investigators doing investigating, and they are basically doing what we've already seen previously on some of the other decks.
I want to take you to an email that you sent to the chair of the Post Office in June. So that is Pol 00448398. So that correspondence from Mr. Reid was the 30th of May of this year. This is then an email unconnected of the 14th of June of this year, entitled Postmaster Police Investigations. And you raise a concern there that information hadn't come to the board relating to prosecutions. Is that right?
That's correct.
You say there are some additional documents on Diligent. Diligent is a system that you can access board papers on. Is that right?
That's correct.
From a board meeting on October the 23rd regarding police investigations and postmasters, which I feel need clarifying. Can you assist us with this email and what your concern was?
So there was an item discussed at the October 23 board meeting regarding police investigations into potential wrongdoings and how the investigations team, supported by legal, wanted to adopt a specific approach. So what myself, Mr. Jacobs, and also Mr. Tidswell and other board members all resisted, said, no, we do not want to go down this approach. And it was agreed for the investigations team, so in this case JB, to come back with what he was thinking in terms of some examples, so as a board we could then appraise what's going on and check the tonality. Now, my alarm bells were ringing when I saw this item had been closed. So for me, this created misinformation within the wider executive based on a decision that had not happened. And as my job as an NED, I ensured I called that out, which is why I've raised this with Mr. Railton. And we have reopened this item, but I'm not sure if there's been any discussions with COSEC or whoever took the minutes on the day as to why such an incredibly important issue was closed when it definitely was not closed.
And why was it that in June of 2024 you were looking into the issue of police investigations?
There was no specific reason as such. For me, I'm always thinking about how to make the organisation better, and just going through what I have to do as a director, looking at the action logs, just double checking things. Were they closed? What's open? Is it assigned to the right person? And when I saw the action log and I saw that closed, that's when I thought, oh, hang on a minute, this is not right. I don't remember this being closed. I confirmed with Mr. Jacobs, do you remember this being closed? And he said no as well. And yeah, I sent, I'm not sure if you've got the attachment to this. I did also send the minutes to corroborate with what I've said here, and Mr. Railton agreed that this is not what was agreed.
And by this stage, the 14th of June of this year, had you been informed about this correspondence between the CEOs of the Post Office and Fujitsu?
No.
Would it have been relevant to the issues you're raising here?
100% yes.
Could we please... Sorry.
Just looking at the dates, it's such a coincidence, but yeah.
Do you know if Mr. Reid was aware of your concern that was being raised here?
Maybe in hindsight, I should have CC'd Mr. Reid in, but I would have expected Mr. Railton to pick that up as chair with Mr. Reid.
Thank you. Could we please turn to FUJ 002432204?
Before we do that, Mr. Blake, can I just be clear, Mr. Ismail, about what you were saying about Mr. Reid's letter, all right? As I understand it, you are certainly saying that before Mr. Reid sent a letter like that to Mr. Patterson, there should have been some awareness of that or a discussion of that at board level. Yeah?
That's correct, sir.
I've got that point completely. What I'm not sure about is whether you actually have an issue with any of the contents of Mr. Reid's letter. And if so, could you tell me what they are and why you have those issues?
Yes. For me, the issues are the post office is just still not seeing what everybody else is seeing. Starting from a victim's, having a starting point as a victim is unacceptable. And for me, Mr. Reid's letter shows the disconnect that exists within the organisation and how information just doesn't seem to be passed, and the silo working mentality, unfortunately, is still rife.
I'm playing devil's advocate now, all right? So nobody should misunderstand me. But if an alleged crime has been committed, like, say, theft or fraud, then there is an alleged victim, all right? And it can only get to the police if the alleged victim makes some kind of report or investigation and then reports it to the police. I think that must be right, must it not? So isn't it inevitable that the victim, or the alleged victim, let's choose our words very carefully, must have a role to play at the very start of an investigation? Otherwise, it never gets to the police.
That's correct, sir. But as the Fujitsu letter stated, the Fujitsu were happy to provide information based on an independent third party verifying. Now, once that happens, then yes, I'm in agreement with you. But to start from a position that echoes the past, I find disappointing.
All right. So am I right in thinking that your point is that before Post Office reports an alleged crime of, say, theft or fraud to the police, it should instigate an independent investigation by someone other than the police before referring it? Is
Yes.
that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Fine. All right. I understand. Thank you.
There's now further correspondence on the 8th of July from Fujitsu. That's FUJ 002432204. It's another response from Mr. Patterson. I'll read to you a few passages from that. He says, I'm glad we both share a commitment to learn lessons from the Post Office Horizon scandal and to ensure that the appalling treatment of postmasters and the miscarriages of justice that occurred could never happen again. That's my reason for writing to you. He says in the next paragraph, in simple terms, the Post Office is requesting that Fujitsu give expert opinion evidence to be used in criminal proceedings against postmasters and post office workers. In your letter, you rightly note that the content of any witness statements is a matter between the police and Fujitsu. However, I consider it necessary to address this issue with you because the request was made by Post Office and because I consider the request to be entirely inappropriate, particularly in the light of the evidence being uncovered at the inquiry. I enclose with this letter, and it's the email chain that we've just been looking at. And he says, Mr. Bartlett continues the prior narrative of seeing the Post Office as the victim and requests a witness statement to address the reliability of the Horizon system and the admissibility of evidence produced from it. Mr. Bartlett suggests that a failure to do this would rightly be interpreted by the police and prosecutors as the Post Office and Fujitsu not having faith in the reliability of the data, with the obvious outcome resulting. A witness statement from Fujitsu attesting to the reliability of the Horizon system and of data from it in criminal proceedings would amount to expert opinion evidence. Fujitsu is incapable of providing expert opinion evidence as it is neither independent nor has it sufficient information to provide such an opinion. As the Post Office is well aware, there has been and continue to be bugs, errors and defects in the Horizon system. Further, Fujitsu currently has and previously has had access to branch transaction records. Your letter also acknowledges the existence of other matters which could have operated to create innocent discrepancies in branch account, including miskeys or omissions when remitting cash or stock based on Horizon data by end users. It then refers to Horizon system being reliant on delivery of services by Post Office and third parties. If we scroll over, he says, based on the evidence which has been seen and heard in the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry, Fujitsu considers that all of the matters mentioned above would need to be investigated carefully by the Post Office and the police, with the assistance of an independent technical IT expert and possibly also a forensic accounting expert to ascertain proper explanations for branch account discrepancies. Just pausing there, we've seen in previous phases of this inquiry discussion about obtaining a statement from an expert who can attest to the reliability of the Horizon system. Are you aware of any discussions at board level about that topic?
No.
Fujitsu considers that only after such an investigation has been undertaken could a meaningful expert witness statement be made in subsequent criminal proceedings which addresses the reliability of the Horizon system and the relevant data produced. For the reasons I've mentioned above, Fujitsu cannot provide such a statement. And then he addresses the topic of shortfalls. I'll ask the same question that I've asked a number of times. Were you made aware of this communication?
No.
We then have Mr. Owen Woodley, acting CEO, responding on the 23rd of July. Could we please turn to FUJ 002433209? I know I've done a lot of reading. I'll just read a few passages from this letter. He says, I wrote further to your letter of 8th of July addressed to Nick Reed, and thank you for coming to our offices to meet with me. The expert evidence point is addressed at the bottom of this page. He says, your letter said that Post Office was requesting that Fujitsu give expert opinion evidence to be used in criminal proceedings against postmasters and Post Office workers. That was not the case. As you rightly say, Fujitsu is not able to provide expert opinion evidence, and it is not sufficiently independent for any statements that it may provide to be deemed expert evidence by the police or the Crown Prosecution Service. Post Office is aware of that and has not / would not request that Fujitsu provides expert opinion evidence. He then says about halfway down that first paragraph, the police have raised questions regarding the data and the Horizon system and the AC and I team. That's what was the Central Investigations Unit, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
Referred the police to Fujitsu as the Post Office's provider of the system to obtain answers to those questions. The feedback they received in April 2024 was that the police had only been able to have one conversation with Fujitsu at the time, and the investigation officers' impression from that conversation was that they were indirectly being told by Fujitsu that the Horizon system was unreliable. As a result, the police told the ACNI team that the investigation could not progress. He then addresses, he says, in light of the feedback from the police, and he discusses the discussion about the letters. If we go over the page, one more paragraph that I'll read. He says, we discussed that Post Office had used the word victim, so he addresses this victim issue in correspondence with Fujitsu. We both acknowledged that while this may be legally and factually accurate description, it does not reflect the change in Post Office's attitude towards postmasters. Does that reflect your own opinion?
Yes.
Yes. Did you have a discussion with Mr. Woodley about that point?
No. The first time I saw this letter was last week when I received my bundle.
Naturally, there will be instances where Post Office has to use the proper legal term to describe matters, for example, in correspondence with or evidence provided to the police or the CPS. However, alternative language will be used when discussing these matters with Fujitsu, other third parties, and in internal Post Office correspondence. Are you aware of any kind of cultural change taking place at the Post Office in the matter that's described here, in terms of the language used within the business? Are you aware of any policies, for example, that people shouldn't be referred to, the Post Office shouldn't be referred to as a victim, save for those circumstances identified here?
No.
I'm very clear that our communications must reflect the cultural change in the organisation. He then addresses the postmaster shortfalls point. The very final letter on this is the response from Fujitsu of the 26th of July, and I'd just like to take you to that. That is FUJ 00243211. This is a letter sent to Mr. Woodley. Is this also a letter that you hadn't seen before receiving it from the inquiry?
Yes, I've not seen this before.
He says, it's unfortunate that Nick was not able to attend the meeting as discussed. The original purpose of writing to Nick was to escalate CEO to CEO the concerns relating to certain behaviours within the Post Office. It seems clear that the Post Office continues to have significant cultural issues, sees itself as a victim with the enforcement and prosecution of postmasters considered as a business as usual activity of a commercial retail company. As I stated in my correspondence to Nick and during our discussions, Fujitsu finds the language and the suggested behaviour unacceptable from Post Office investigators. I do not intend to engage further with the Post Office on this matters I raised. We completely trust in Sir Win and the inquiry process, which will examine the extent of the Post Office change in Phase 7. Aren't we back again to the school playground a little bit here, with Fujitsu refusing to engage further with the Post Office, and as seen in this exchange of letters?
Yes, it does feel like that, yes.
I mean, how would you describe the relationship between the Post Office and Fujitsu insofar as you're aware?
From the updates that we received as NEDs at board level, the relationship wasn't the best, and I can understand that. And we both need to work together for the short term, at least. And until we have our new branch IT system ready, there's no way of exiting the relationship with Fujitsu. So it was a case of get on with it and make it work for the postmasters up and down the country.
And the impression that's given by this correspondence is a real breakdown in the relationship between the two of you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I can see why it does look like that, yes.
Would you expect a letter of this sort, or the correspondence that we've just been seeing, to have been addressed at board level in light of the relationship between the two companies?
Yes, as Fujitsu is one of our biggest partners, I would have expected that, yes.
And has that seeming breakdown in the relationship been addressed at board level to the best of your knowledge?
No, because it's not been raised.
I'd like to ask you a few more issues on cultural issues before we take our morning break. We're only taking one morning break today, but it'll be 15 minutes long. Equality and diversity issues you've raised in your statement. That document can come down, thank you. You say at paragraph 25 that you've only been invited to one equality, diversity and inclusion meeting on the 3rd of March 2022, despite being the EDI lead on the board. Can you give us a little bit more detail on that, please?
As I said in my statement, I was appointed by Angela Williams as the lead when she was the Chief People Officer, and I was only invited once. I'm not sure why. And some of the conversations I've had, so last month, for example, I had a conversation with an individual of an ethnic minority, and just a polite, hi, who are you kind of conversation, introductory conversation. And when I introduced myself, he said to me, oh, I didn't know that you were on the board. This organization has a certain point where individuals with diversity can get to, and then beyond that, there is nobody, unfortunately.
I'd like to take you to some email correspondence from last summer. Could we please turn to poll 00448-378? And if we start on page 2, please. You have written there to Jane Davies. So what was Jane Davies's position?
She was the chief retail officer. No, she was the chief people officer, sorry.
Thank you. Subject, racism and employment practices. You're writing to express your deep concerns about recent issues regarding racism and employment practices at the company. First, I was deeply troubled to learn from recent articles that racism has been identified within our business. As the D&I board member, I am particularly concerned that I was not informed of these issues until a postmaster brought them to my attention. I believe that we must address these issues head-on and ensure that our company is a welcoming and inclusive environment for all employees. Sticking to that first point, what was the background to that?
There was...
If we scroll up, sorry.
It's there on the article from the Computer Weekly. So there was an article on the Computer Weekly website regarding a document.
If we scroll down below the link, that might assist you.
So this was when individuals rang into the call centre in their time of need to report losses, and people on the other side answering, POL employees answering calls were using the term, I've got another Patel.
And you have also mentioned here an issue with the rehiring of staff members. How does that tie into the equality, diversity and inclusion issues that you're raising?
I think it reinforces what I have already said.
What do you mean?
In terms of there's a specific makeup of individuals this organisation hires, and by rehiring we are never deviating from that. And for me, what was clearly evident, and I've raised on numerous occasions when I started as an NED in early 21 throughout the strategy days to various individuals who joined the organisation. The post office has to relate as an organisation to the demographic of its postmasters. There's got to be some kind of connection, so the hierarchy, the middle management, the board, everybody understands what postmasters are going through. And an example of this was, and it's in my witness statement, in April 24, when there was 3 events organised during the month of Ramadan. And I received an email. Firstly, I wasn't invited, neither was Mr. Jacobs, to postmaster listening events. And we were both shocked because we had postmasters saying to us, what's the point of you two being on the board? We don't hear from you. We don't know what you're doing. So on the not hearing from us, in November 21, Richard Taylor advised both of us not to communicate on social media or with any other postmasters, which was the way I certainly saw it, was a lack of confidence in our independence and what we're doing and in trust. Going back to the April 24, when these events were organised, I raised the point that why we've not been invited by the senior management. That was never responded to. And my specific conversations at the time with Tracy Marshall was, okay, Tracy, if you want to do these events throughout this period, just ensure that you cater for individuals who are fasting. So please have proper meals ready, ablution facilities, and mass prayer facilities. And the response I got was, we don't provide that. And I challenged back and I said, well, so then you're excluding postmasters. And with my conversations with Mr. Jacobs, he confirmed to me as well, I've got staff members who would be fasting also, so I wouldn't be able to attend. So I don't think the business quite understood. Now, common sense did prevail, and Mr. Woodley rightly, once I've raised this with him, changed the dates to afterwards. Now, the business was very keen to get them events done before phase 5 and 6, and rightly or wrongly, but the timing just was not right.
If we scroll up on this email, we can see Mr. Jacobs also responds. He says he had recent reports from an Asian colleague who complained to him that he was talked down to by a team member on the help desk that handles transaction correction queries. When he challenged and claimed it was inaccurate and asked to organise a visit to visit the cash centre to see the evidence, he claims he was repeatedly obstructed and told to accept the transaction correction. He would add, having visited the cash centre and watched the CCTV, he was 100% correct, despite the claim by the post office that the matter had been reviewed by a supervisor. If we scroll up, we can see a response from Mr. Tidswell, who says he thinks there are a number of strands here. First, there is highly disturbing evidence from the inquiry about historical racism, and that was the identification codes issue. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Then there is a question about hiring practices to ensure that the post office is alert to rehiring people who have a history at the post office, and that's a matter we've already discussed today. There is the important need to ensure we have a business today in which racism is not tolerated at any level. And he says the report from Elliot about incidents is very concerning. Ms. Davies, on the first page, at the top of the first page, also says that we've all been disturbed by this feedback. It needs to be appropriately investigated and dealt with. We're taking steps. We should all get on a call so we can update and agree appropriate steps. Do you think that sufficient steps have been taken in this regard?
No.
Was there a conversation here where steps were agreed?
Not that I can recall, no. But I'm not sure how long Miss Davies was in the business after this, but I would have expected this to have been something, an issue that the people team would have been taken seriously, and I would have expected more than one individual to take ownership of this.
Thank you. And that can come down, thank you. Very finally, before the break, the topic of bonuses. Within your statement at paragraph 68 to 75, you address what you refer to as an unhealthy and unjustified obsession with bonuses and remuneration. Can you assist us with what you mean by that?
So, from my observations throughout being on the board, there is clearly a culture which is bonus-led. So, firstly, between January 23 and March 23, there was an obfuscation of Remco papers by the wider executive, which resulted in Bonusgate in May 23. Then we had recently discovered, that there was a Remco pay grade over the last 6 months. Being a board member, I wasn't even aware of this. So I challenged Amanda Burton regarding this specific Remco pay grade. And in April 24, Amanda responded saying how since 2019, certain individuals had received pay increases up to 30% since 2019, whereas the reality is postmasters on the front line have not had a real increase since 2015. My own businesses, my income's a couple of percent. My costs have gone up by 18% in the last 2 years, clearly showing how the culture is driven specifically. It's a bonus culture within this business. Then there was some communication again in April with myself, Amanda Burton and Mr. Jacobs regarding S-tips and L-tips. So the management put forward a recommendation for their L-tips. And like I said yesterday, until the bonuses are being paid and until the reassurance is given when they are paid, morale's a little low, which we've heard on numerous occasions at board meetings last year also. And the recommendation put forward for the L-tip, which is long-term incentive payment, was complaints against postmasters. And when myself and Mr. Jacobs saw that email, we read it a few times, thinking, what? How can that be? And we then went back to Amanda and informed her, why is the wider executive putting forward a metric that they're not even in control of? How does that even make sense? So then, as part of my role and good governance, I went back to Amanda and I've disclosed the email outlining key metrics that should be used. Firstly, I don't believe this business should have any bonuses. However, what I've been told is it's part of the contracts that have been agreed. Now, if our hands are tied, then surely the metrics need to be right, which need to be connected to the realities of postmasters. So what are postmasters receiving in remuneration? What is going on in terms of the organisation, in terms of profitability? What about cutting central costs? So these were my counter proposals. And I did that, and it was at the board meeting in June 24 or July 24, very recently, when I challenged back to Amanda advising when are we going to implement, and Amanda Burton, and I was very disappointed with the response. It was, again, the way I perceived it, protecting the wider executive to ensure bonuses are met. All I was told was, sorry, it's been agreed, we have to stick with what we've got.
It might be suggested that there is a tension there between being a sub-postmaster and being a member of the board, and potentially a conflict when it comes to those kinds of remuneration issues. What would you say about that?
I'm not sure it is. I can see why it looks like there's a conflict. It's about bringing the reality of doing my duty as a director to life. So my responsibility is, and my fiduciary duties, to ensure the business is run correctly and to ensure the taxpayer, the shareholder, has value for money, and also ensure postmasters past, present, future are treated well and the business is running in an effective manner. So seeing this culture and not calling it out, I feel compromises my responsibilities. So I appreciate how it does look like a conflict, but for me, my role as, in terms of my moral duty in calling it out is my first responsibility, and that's what I was doing.
Thank you. So that might be an appropriate moment to take our morning break.
Yes, of course. 20 to 12?
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, thank you, yeah.
We're going to move on to a new topic, and that is the new branch IT system. Could we please bring onto screen your witness statement? That's WITN 111700100 at page 9, please. Thank you. If we scroll down the page, you've set out in your witness statement a number of problems that you have faced with the current Horizon system. At 31.1, you say Horizon suffers from a lack of integration with other systems. If we move on to 31.2, I think you say that Horizon systems are unnecessarily complex. 31.3, not designed to cater for human error. 31.4, the daily and weekly reports are not easy to analyse. 31.5, there are issues with Horizon incorrectly reporting the sum of foreign currency being held in the branch. If we scroll down, 31.6, issues with Horizon failing to recognise the reversal of transactions. 31.7, experience of Horizon taking payments from a customer twice. And then incorrectly recording ATM transactions. In principle, are you in favour of a new IT system?
Yes.
Thank you. That can come down. The new branch IT project was commissioned prior to you joining the post office. Is that right?
Yes.
Who is responsible for that project?
So when I initially joined the business, Jeff Smith was responsible, and at some point, I think Zdravko Miladonov, and then more recently, Chris Brocklesby.
Paragraph 183 of your witness statement, you say that when you first joined, the anticipated budget was £280 million, and that is now in excess of £1 billion. Is that right?
Yes.
What do you understand to be the main reason behind that significant increase in cost?
There's a variety of different factors. Firstly, I remember when 280 million was discussed at the board meeting late 21, and Mr. Jacobs specifically questioned Zdravko, saying, 280 million, does that not sound too cheap? And the response was, well, that's the costings that we've got to for now. But as the project has evolved, there's been more to deal with. As the inquiries evolved, also there's been more, for example, training on the first Horizon, the current system that we're using, should I say, the lack of training, the lack of oversight, support. So in order to address these issues, to ensure the business doesn't make the same mistakes as it has done in the past, the budget has increased to ensure everything's incorporated for positive implementation and a better experience.
In your statement, you've raised a number of issues, starting with hardware being purchased and sitting in storage, is that relating to the NBIT project, or is that something else?
No, that's in relation to NBIT. So, again, we were told at board that we had to decide on the purchase of this hardware. So, as a board, we then authorised in late 23 for the purchase of 30 million because we were instructed we had to make a decision, and in order to be ready to have the goods delivered for the implementation of the new system. And at the time we were told we were getting a very good deal, hence why we did it at a discount, 5%, something along them lines. Then Zdravko left the business. We had Chris Brocklesby, and now we've got a new individual, Andy Nice, who's heading up the new NBIT program. And the recent board discussions that we have had has opened a totally different conversation. And the conversation is as follows: Are we actually going to be ready for NBIT in the next 2 to 3 years? It doesn't look like it. Hence the Fujitsu extension that we're looking for, which I challenged in June 24, instead of going for a 5-year extension to give the shareholder and postmaster some reassurance that we want to get on with this new IT system, go with a 2 years +1 so we have a break. Now, further investigating that's happened and part of the strategic review that's been taking place, it's clear that we are not ready. We will not be ready for NBIT within the next maybe 2-3 years. Hence why buying this equipment was probably the wrong decision when we did that. And this has been spoken about at board over the last few months. And again, I've not seen any accountability taken for that decision yet.
And who do you hold responsible for that decision?
The IT, the individuals working within IT, and obviously the wider executive, because everyone's aware of what's been going on and what the business is trying to do in terms of implementing a new IT system.
Is there a particular individual within the IT team that you consider should take accountability and responsibility for that?
I feel it's a wider executive issue, because the decision wasn't solely based on one issue. Everyone within the wider executive would have discussed that.
Without going into legal advice, do you feel that the board have taken into account the matters that were raised by the inquiry in phase 2 of the inquiry concerning the original Horizon procurement and the difficulties that were experienced?
I'm not sure the board certainly has not been told about the specifics in terms of phase 2. Maybe the wider executive are probably more aware. I'm not privy to that, so I couldn't tell you.
You also raise that there are still a large number of bugs in the new system. Can you briefly summarise that for us?
Yes, so recently, since the Fujitsu conversation started in June 24 at board, we had to assess the commercials in terms of a renewal with Fujitsu and what's the longevity, how many years, tenure, etc. So in order to do that, there was an assessment made by the new chair on the current state of the NBIT program. And basically, we were so far behind, and the board had not been informed anywhere near to the level that it should have with regards to making decisions.
And are you aware of those issues with the bugs being resolved?
Not yet, no.
Do you feel that there is a sufficient grasp of the issue?
The board is aware that there are bugs, and I feel the board is waiting for the decisions from the strategic review in order to then produce a plan in terms of what needs to be addressed in a certain order.
You've raised in your witness statement a number of issues with the usability of the new system. That's paragraph 185 of your witness statement. I won't bring it up onto screen unless you need to see it. But first, you raise the issue of customer-facing screens. Very briefly, what is that issue?
So currently, if a customer visits a post office, the experience that a customer has is dependent on the staff member serving them. So depending on the skill level, capability, ability of the staff member. And it's clear, so the better trained, the better informed staff member gives the customer a better experience. However, having a customer-facing screen helps the postmaster enormously, because firstly, it helps reduce on a training level. Secondly, from a governance and compliancy level, we hit high marks. And thirdly, the overall journey in terms of the customer choice is better, because the customer can actually see what the counter clerk is actually doing. And the experience is already so complex. So for me, I felt it's a necessity, and again, so did Mr. Jacobs. And we were continually told there's no money for it. Whereas we said it's a necessity, and maybe 2 or 3 occasions we were told, no, sorry, we can't do this.
The second issue you raise is to do with dual terminal logins. Very briefly, can you explain that issue?
Yes, so currently on Horizon, so a postmaster from Burnley who raised this with me, he's just one of a number on the existing Horizon, how it's very difficult. If you're serving, you can't afford to have an extra member of staff. So if you've got account customers, you want to do them on one terminal because you're the manager of the branch, and then next to you you've got another terminal so you can keep serving your customers. So the customer experience is still okay, and you can still run your business. And unfortunately, on the current system, the post office, with their rule by exception, doesn't allow postmasters to do that, although they did for a very short period of time. So this is, again, another one of my concerns that I've raised for the new NBIT system. This should allow postmasters to operate effectively.
A third issue you raise is an issue with a retail sales facility.
Yes, so there's a lack of integration currently, and many postmasters need Horizon to provide a form of taking retail sales. And again, the business seems very reluctant to do that. And the business is very happy and very comfortable saying, oh, we've got costs to pay for card machines if card payments are taken on our terminals. However, when postmasters have costs and postmasters' Wi-Fi is being used, the post office unfortunately doesn't consider that, which is disappointing, hence me raising that point.
And the fourth issue, a particular issue regarding stamp stock balancing. Is that to do with the issue we spoke about yesterday, or is that a different issue?
No, this helps alleviate issues like that. So, again, as I have said on numerous occasions, myself and Mr. Jacobs have been ignored on so many different issues, and this is another classic. Regarding the design of NBIT, for us as postmasters, for the wider network, we want to produce something that's 2030 ready. We want to reduce the risk for postmasters, but also the risk for post office. And as part of good governance, we felt that the post office should start to consider, like they do with the self-serving kiosks, printing postage stamps. That reduces overnight the liability, approximately £200 million liability that we have in physical stamp stock. And in simple terms, a customer would come to the counter, they post a letter, parcel, whatever they want, and the post office clerk on the other side would print a stamp, whether that's a first, second, it's irrelevant. They would just print a stamp, either stick it on for a customer. If it's for a letter for tomorrow, give the sticker to the customer, they can stick it on. We currently do that, and unfortunately there's been no appetite to do that. And it was late last year when the conversation started with Chris Brocklesby again, saying, why have we not been informed? You're making decisions about auto stock rem based on trying to correct stamp issues, which is fine to make postmasters' life easier. But why are we not thinking about this when we're redesigning a new system? It reduces the time a postmaster has to balance every week. So overall controls, risk, everything comes back in line.
If I could take you to some board minutes, it's poll 004487889. This is a meeting of the 9th of March of 2023. If we could turn, please, to page 5. It appears from these minutes that you did have some influence on the board or an opportunity to feed back to the board. If we scroll down, we see there it says, the chair noted that SI had had sessions in relation to NBIT and queried what his response had been. NBIT said, SI replied that he and EJ, that's Mr. Jacobs, had had a short demonstration of the development version of NBIT, and that although not all functionality was operational, good progress was being made and their experience was positive. You then spoke to the simplification of the system and the ease of training. If we scroll down, we can see there's reference there to you advising that you are still heavily in favour of customer-facing screens, so that's the issue that we just spoke about. As part of NBIT, and queried whether there was a way to be more targeted with customer-facing screens. The response was that postmasters self-funding customer-facing screens was another option. AC was Mr. Cameron, noted that one of the advantages of NBIT was that it was much quicker and cheaper to make changes in the future. We did not wish to invite delay and change the scope now. You queried whether funding for customer-facing screens could be applied as part of the next funding submission. Looking at that and looking at your experiences, do you feel that you have been listened to at board level in respect of the NBIT system?
Clearly not. There's been a certain tunnel vision approach to just get off horizon, especially with everything that's been going on. And that's led, unfortunately, to the business trying to do this very quickly, which is not necessarily the right way. And just to give a bit more context to these minutes, myself and Mr. Jacobs met with one of the individuals working on the Horizon program, and what they showed us was two very simple transactions, and this was very early on. The transactions we were shown were how to do a return and how to post an item, and we were shown what to expect from a back office perspective. It wasn't working yet, and for us as proactive postmasters, myself and Mr. Jacobs, this was revolutionary, because it would help us, it would transform the way we run our businesses and how we serve our customers. So for us, it was definitely the right approach that we were using. However, it was a very, very simple model, and I'm not sure people appreciate how clunky and how big Horizon currently is, and how even a simple screen is such a big upgrade. So for us to see new technology was massive, and one of the big plus points for us was the printers, which compared to what we've got now, the thermal printers, saving so much time, so much money for the shareholder.
Thank you. I'd like to move on now to a number of reports to the board, recent reports to the board, and I'm going to start with something that is called the Tenio report. Could we please turn to poll 00448-624? This is a board pack for a meeting on the 4th of June of this year. Was that a meeting that you attended?
Yes.
Could we please turn to page 109? There was a strategic review that was carried out, and this is an update for the board by a company called Teneo. Are you aware of the background to this report?
Yes. One of the conditions that Mr. Railton insisted on upon his interim appointment was to ensure a strategic review is done, and that should be done specifically by Teneo.
And if we scroll over, we can see the background. It says there, Post Office Limited has invited Teneo to carry out a comprehensive strategic review of the business and develop a clear plan for the future. The Post Office faces a range of challenges, including, and it sets out various challenges. The final one of those is a need for technological overhaul of core systems with substantial delays and overspends on the horizon replacement. And that's in line with, I think, what we've just been talking about.
Correct.
Was this well received, this report?
Yes, it's the beginning of a new journey, is the way the board was looking at this, and the business, to be fair. So yeah, the starting point now, how we execute is the challenge.
If we scroll over the page, it has a set of key questions. One of them is fit-for-purpose technology, and the questions it asks is, how will technology support the future operations of the Post Office? How do we ensure new systems, e.g. horizon replacement, are fit for purpose and future-proof? How should we partner with suppliers to achieve this? How can technology be leveraged to remove inefficiencies and human error? In your view, are those matters now being taken seriously by the business?
It depends on what the findings are once the review's been conducted and the implementation. I think it's a bit premature for me to give you a response for that.
Could we please turn to minutes of a board meeting from the 4th of June this year? That's poll 00448-648. We can see there at the Mr. Railton is now interim chair by this stage, although if we scroll down we can see that given his recent appointment, it says that Mr. Tidswell would act as chair at that particular meeting.
It was Mr. Railton's first meeting, hence he asked Mr. Tidswell if you don't mind.
Thank you. Can we please turn to page 4, and we're looking about halfway down page 4. So we've just seen that IT is going to be a big issue in the future and something that the company is currently getting to grips with. We see there SJ was discussing the position on the reporting of procurement risk exceptions between ARC and the board, with LC as there seemed to be some inconsistency. Action, the chair queried whether IA or an external needed to be engaged to conduct a review of procurement governance. And then there is a reference a little further down to just at the end of that bullet point. It says, Mr. Railton and SJ agreed that IA needed to undertake a review of procurement governance. Can you assist us with what the issues are relating to procurement governance, however brief?
Procurement currently is a bit of a mess within the post office. So I've heard the head of procurement, and as I've mentioned in my statement, say in May 24, the board is risk averse. And at the following board meeting, I mentioned this, advising someone needs to have a conversation with procurement. The board is not risk averse. If incomplete information is provided, it's very difficult for the board to make the right decision. Then we had a situation earlier this year, June 24, where procurement basically made a mess of the spend on the new NBIT system. it went over 50 million. So we had to then get retrospective approval. Prior to this, towards the end of last year, again earlier this year, there's been issues regarding procurement. There was one point raised brilliantly by Brian Gaunt, one of the NEDs, when he advised, with the conversations he's had, that procurement were trying to agree contracts for 10 years, which is outside the norm in terms of commercial terms. The average is 5 years, but they were trying to go for 10 years just to avoid doing procurement again. Hence why I say procurement is a mess within the post office, and it's a procurement-led kind of approach, which is not helpful, not a commercial, common sense approach, and this is creating wasted funds for the taxpayer on numerous occasions, unfortunately.
And where do you say responsibility for that lies?
That's, again, procurement, but also the wider executive, because they're all in it together. Everyone has to be working towards the same goal. Issues like this should be dealt with way before they get to the board. And again, it's in my evidence, the Belfast exit programme. What a disaster that was. The business wasted just under £35 million to, again, part of the NBIT journey, to move on to a cloud-based system, being told constantly, we've got to do this, and then being told, oh, Amazon said we can't do this. The only thing we got from the 34.8 million that we spent, which was abandoned in January 23, was a new air conditioning system for our Belfast data centre. So it was extremely disappointing, and again, showing a lack of accountability on that side, on procurement, to deal with issues going forward to ensure we don't make the same mistakes again.
Thank you. 2 further reports have been obtained in the last summer. 2 reports from Grant Thornton. The first is called a board effectiveness report, and the other is a governance review. Can you briefly tell us the background to obtaining those 2 reports?
So, Mr. Staunton, before leaving, commissioned these reports, and from my understanding, because of what the business had been through due to bonus gate and other issues that were arising, he wanted to have an external organisation involved and produce a framework to ensure governance and compliance is implemented in the right way, obviously looking at the issues we've got. So that process started in October 23. Then, obviously, Mr. Staunton left towards the end of January 24, and early February, around February, should I say, the first draft of the Grant Thornton report was produced. And again, you've got the emails when myself and Mr. Jacobs challenged back, because the first draft was highly critical. And I remember conversations being had where certain NEDs said it was unhelpful. And the response myself and Mr. Jacobs sent was, so that's a good starting point. Let's just get on with what they have advised us to do. However, the report was then, in certain parts, redone.
So it was critical of who? Individuals, the company?
The way it was written was probably it was more critical than how it is now.
And at whose request were the changes made?
I'm not sure who specifically instructed Grant Thornton to rewrite certain parts. I'm not privy to that, unfortunately.
Was anybody in particular calling for the changes to be made?
I remember the UK GI rep saying that. I also remember the interim chair, Ben Tidswell, also saying it was unhelpful.
Unhelpful for who? For a public audience or for an internal audience, or simply that it was not well drafted? The
words used were unhelpful. In terms of what context, you'd have to ask them.
Thank you. Could we please look at the first of those? That's poll 00446 And this is the Board Effectiveness Review, dated the 19th of June 2024. If we turn over the page, we can see the background. And it says there, the purpose of this review is to provide an independent analysis of the Post Office Board's effectiveness against the requirements of the UK Corporate Governance Code, etc. Then says the report has been collated from common themes identified during our point-in-time assessment of the board and its committees through key findings and survey output taken from our governance review, meeting observations, interviews with board members and additional document review with fieldwork concluding in mid-May 2024. If we look at page 43, it has, I think, your name. You were somebody who was interviewed as part of this project.
That's correct.
Is that right? Thank you. Could we turn back, please, then, to page 8? And it sets out there the key findings. First, lack of clarity on the purpose of the board, with a shareholder relationship inhibiting the board's effectiveness due to perceived interference in the Post Office's work and limited visibility around the longer-term funding and objectives of the organisation. Is that a finding that you agree with?
Yes, it's very difficult being the Post Office and having your shareholder, the government, and funding being given in limited amounts. So asking for X million and then small amounts being given, it's very difficult to have a plan in place.
Number 2, low levels of trust and team identity. It says 3/4 of the way down number 2, it says equally there are some views expressed of a 2-tier board in operation where decisions are taken outside of the formal board structure without proper debate, and not all non-executive directors have the same visibility on committee papers and minutes. Is that something you agree with?
That's correct, yes.
And those are matters that you've already addressed
Yes.
in your evidence. Number 3, no unifying purpose and strategy. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Number 4, lack of succession planning. What's your view on that?
Yes, we had discussions regarding succession planning and in private NED-only sessions, and it was clear the lack of talent that existed within the Post Office to take over if senior individuals had left the business. And an example was when Martin Kersley was about to leave the business. We were looking for somebody, and at the time the CEO advised the NEDs that the second in command, Ross Borkett, was too junior, and this was Martin left probably last year. I can't remember the exact dates. Now, regarding Ross, there was a discussion had earlier this year who's going to succeed Martin. He was stepping in interim, and the discussion that took place was obviously the CEO advised he was too junior, wouldn't possibly be taken seriously. So we were thought, certainly myself and Mr. Jacobs were under the impression that we're looking for someone more senior to do the banking aspect, because it's massive. It's 50% of the Post Office's business now. And we find out a few months later that Mr. Borkett's been appointed as the head of banking. So we were shocked. Now, that again highlights the lack of succession planning.
If we move to number 5, team process and meeting discipline, rolling agendas, chairing of meetings and presentations of information from the exec to the board all require focus. Is that something you agree with?
That's correct.
Number 6, the people agenda from culture through to reward needs ownership at board. Is that along the lines of the evidence that you've been giving yesterday and today?
Yes.
Could we please turn to page 16? This is priority C, leadership capacity, composition and succession. I just wanted to ask you about the penultimate bullet point on the left-hand side. It said that the Post Office did not anticipate an issue with corporate memory until recently in terms of managing multiple simultaneous non-executive director rotations points to poor succession planning processes. As such, the board should keep a line of sight over the output and debate with the NOMCO in terms of its terms of reference. Again, is that the same kind of issue about succession planning, this time relating to non-executive director rotations?
Yes, and this was a point that myself and Mr. Jacobs raised, and it's also a point I raised with Amanda Burton before. Sorry, it was a point that was raised with Amanda Burton, not by myself, but by Henry Staunton and Jane Davies, again on corporate memory. And if you're going to be the chair of REMCO, you should be well versed on at least the last 12 to 18 months of what's been happening in that committee. And I was really disappointed when I raised the questions about salary increases, and she wasn't aware. So again, reinforcing the point of a lack of corporate memory within the organisation, unfortunately.
If we could turn to page 19, please, and that's priority D, which addresses issues of culture. They say there on the left-hand side, first two bullet points, trust is lacking between board members, exacerbated by the perception that there appears to be a two-tier board with some non-executive directors or independent non-executive directors excluded from certain decision-making, which is carried out informally by a subgroup of the board. Is that very much in line with the evidence that you've been giving?
Yes.
The postmaster non-executive directors can understandably become very excised at issues affecting the postmaster community and can on occasion be seen as activists rather than contributing fully as part of the team. What's your response to that?
I can see why the report says that, because we saw on the correspondence yesterday that individuals on the board thought we were shop stewards and union reps. However, for me, if we hadn't been blocked in November 21 and continually regarding communication to the wider postmaster network and within the business, people still don't know we were there and still are there within the post office employee circle. I think that would have helped reduce some of the frustrations massively.
Can we turn to the second report? That's poll 004464777. This is the governance review. If we turn over the page, we can see the background to that. It says there, in accordance with the statement of work dated the 12th of October 2023, we present our report on the effectiveness of the governance practices at Post Office. So the work was commissioned on the 12th of October 2023. It's taken quite a considerable time to produce, and are some of the reasons for that, as you've said, because the report was originally provided in draft and was subject to revision?
Yes, but also the individual, i.e. Mr. Staunton, who commissioned the report, was exited from the business. So there was no continuity as such in following it through.
Thank you. If we turn to page 7, we can briefly go through the key findings. I'll again do what I did with the previous report and we'll just take you to those headline points. Key findings: one of the most pressing areas to address to improve the impact of governance design is a purpose/cohesive strategy at the group level, which sets direction and ambition. First, the lack of a unifying purpose and group-wide strategy between the Post Office and the shareholder. Is that something that you agree with?
Yes.
Second, conflict around the role of the shareholder versus the board. Again, are you able to give your views on that particular point?
I agree.
Leadership capacity. It says that Pol is currently affected by ongoing and upcoming board rotations, which impact on leadership. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Fourth, decision-making forums at enterprise level lack pace and do not enable accountability. What's your view on that?
As I said yesterday, unfortunately, in this business, the lack of decision making and the pace at which things go through, it's very, very difficult to do something quickly. It's like moving 10 oil tankers all chained together at the same time. It's really hard.
And number 5, culture, a lack of trust, accountability, and performance management. Is that something you agree with?
Yes.
Looking at those 2 reports, is there anything there that stands out in particular for you as a concern with regards to the Post Office?
I think it's disappointing that investigations are not part of the key findings. And in hindsight, after what we've seen today and what was in my bundle, I would have expected there to be a specific section on investigations being such a sensitive issue.
Thank you. That can come down. The very final topic that I'd like to ask you about is your involvement with sub-postmasters. Could we please have a look at poll 00448370? This is an email exchange from quite early on in your time as a non-executive director. You email Mr. Taylor and you say, hope all is well. Both myself and Elliot need some comms out as soon as possible, as many postmasters think we're doing nothing. Can we have a chat next week? And he says, of course, happy to discuss. I can speak on a call after the board meeting. Let me know when suits. Can you explain the concern that you had at this point in time?
For myself and Mr. Jacobs, it felt like a tokenist gesture in terms of putting us on the board and then basically stifling us regarding communication. We wanted to talk to postmasters. We wanted to bring this business closer together. We were all going through a really tough time, but unfortunately we were just not given the opportunity. We were not trusted to speak to the postmaster community, unfortunately.
Could we turn to poll 00448389? Moving on in time, this is now to April of this year. If we look at the bottom of this page onto the next page, you are emailing the non-executive directors and you say, I'd like to bring to your attention an issue regarding the postmaster events. We've recently received invites with very short notice, which is a disappointment on the part of our retail team. Once again, the team has failed to keep the board up to date and also needs me and Elliot informed about the postmaster listening events to ensure postmaster non-executive directors are present. Can you assist us with your concern there?
This is in relation to what we discussed prior to the break, the events that were organised during the month of Ramadan.
Yes.
So this is all part of that conversation.
And do you feel that you are being sufficiently kept in touch with events relating to postmasters?
No.
If we please could turn to poll 00448391. Moving on to the next month, 1st of May 2024. Let's start on the second page, the bottom of the second page, please. You say there, it's an email from Tracy Marshall to yourself and Mr. Jacobs. She says, I'm writing to ask for your help, please, with the ongoing non-executive director recruitment campaign. You may have seen it in Martin Roberts' email yesterday that we've taken the decision to extend the application window. Next paragraph, please. That's as a result of feedback from sub-postmasters. She says the other piece of feedback received is that postmasters want to understand a bit more about the role itself from your perspective. So they want you to address them in respect of the recruitment drive. And if we go, please, over to the first page, there's a response from you. At the top of the page, please. You say, top of page 1, you say, over the past 3 years, we have been significantly hindered from engaging with postmasters at the desired level due to a lack of response from the retail engagement and comms teams, despite repeated requests. Additionally, we are firmly opposed to the way in which the replacement process is being handled, which we have both been vocal about, specifically with regards to the lack of continuity, corporate memory, and effective postmaster oversight that will be lost in the handover process. There seem to be two issues there. One is a general concern about the engagement you're allowed to have with postmasters, and the other is actually about the replacement process itself. Can we take each of those in terms? If we start with the first, what is the concern that's expressed there about being able to engage with postmasters?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Sorry. It's a little noisy. We'll just wait for the noise to die down for a second. Thank you. So the first issue there, oh no, the noise is back again. We'll just wait a moment. Sorry, sir, there's some building work above us and it's slightly disruptive.
It's a continuation of what was happening yesterday, I take it.
Possibly worse.
Right.
Well, let's see if we can plough through it. There is a first concern that you are being hindered from engaging with postmasters. Briefly, can you assist us with how you are being hindered with engaging with sub-postmasters?
So, as I've mentioned previously, in November 21, when Richard Taylor advised both myself and Mr. Jacobs not to have any communication on social media with any postmasters, number one. Number two, when I was out visiting postmasters on my own time, my own initiative. Again, I was told that regional managers and individuals higher up were uncomfortable with me going out on my own. And for me, that was getting a flavour to ensure I bring back to the board to do a better job. Regarding postmaster events, continually myself and Mr. Jacobs were not invited, and I'm not sure why. Regarding the second part of your question, we had an initial conversation with Tracy Marshall, Martin Roberts, Sean Kerrison. I'm not sure if Sean Kerrison was in the room, but Tracy was definitely there and Martin Roberts were there. And the discussion was how to have, what should the criteria be to bring the new postmaster NEDs. And myself and Mr. Jacobs put together, we recommended a certain criteria on the call to them. And that was totally ignored. And then the advert went out with something totally different. So for myself and Mr. Jacobs, it was very disappointing. We will leave the board. We want, when our time's due, no problems with that whatsoever. However, all the corporate memory information that we've built, we want to give it to individuals, firstly, who are capable, secondly, who can hold the business to account with the right level of scrutiny. That's all we wanted. But again, we were totally ignored in what we suggested.
Thank you, Mr. Ismail. Those are all of my questions. Sir, we have some questions from our own Mr. Jacobs.
Right.
I'll hand over to him.
Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Ismail. I represent a large number of sub-postmasters. Is that better? Thank you. I represent a large number of sub-postmasters, and I have a number of questions for you. As part of the Post Office Board, have you been informed of the government's plans for the future of the Post Office?
Not yet. No.
Sorry,
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm trying to. I'm facing you.
Yes,
trying
if
to.
I need to speak up, let me know.
Yes.
I know there's some noise in the background. You say not yet. Are you expecting to hear?
My assumption is once the strategic review has taken place, there will be some serious discussions about the future of the post office. I did have a conversation with Johnny Reynolds a few weeks ago at the opening of a banking hub in his constituency, and the conversation was very positive. And one of the first points Johnny Reynolds made was to resolve redress for postmasters and to ensure current postmasters are treated fairly and postmaster remuneration is reflective of the efforts that are being put in.
Normally we would expect the owner of a very large institution such as this to have a 3 or a 5 or a 10-year plan with the direction of travel for the future of the post office. Is that the sort of thing that you're expecting to happen?
I am, once the strategic review has been concluded, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you about board awareness of survey results. Gavin Ellison gave evidence yesterday. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You might have been outside the room when he did so. Have you read the YouGov report that has been provided for the inquiry?
I have been cited.
So you'll know, won't you, that approximately 1,000 current sub-postmasters responded.
Yes.
70% say they suffer from screen freezes, 68% loss of connection, 57% say they've experienced unexplained discrepancies, and 65% of sub-postmasters surveyed experienced these types of issues at least once a month. You're aware of that?
Yes, I can relate to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I know that you said that you've experienced similar things in your own branches, haven't you?
That's correct, sir.
Do you know if the Post Office Board or senior executives, before this survey came out, were aware of the huge dissatisfaction amongst sub-postmasters with how the Horizon system's working and how they're still being treated by the Post Office?
So firstly, a simple answer to your question is I'm not sure they are aware. The board certainly is not, right, to the level at which YouGov broke things down and specific points. And a survey is as useful as the questions you ask.
Yeah.
So what's telling is the questions that are being asked in the postmaster surveys and the post office employee surveys. And if there's consistency applied, then there's specific data to cross-reference against and to produce a plan to implement. And I feel once the current board has sight of the YouGov results, they will put them forward and hopefully produce a plan. In terms of current and existing bugs, we are never provided with any specific detail. All we're told at board level is there's a number of bugs. We have fixed X amount of bugs. That's the only detail.
And this theme in your evidence about the board not being told what's going on by the executive, it feeds into previous employee survey results, doesn't it?
Yes, sir.
And you say at paragraph 125 of your statement, in relation to 2023 employee survey results, that the poor results were not accurately reported to the board.
That's correct, sir.
Do you think then that the executive are deliberately downplaying the scale of problems relating to sub-postmaster dissatisfaction?
I don't think it's just sub-postmaster dissatisfaction. The executive, wider executive, is cherry-picking what issues they want to bring to board, which is not helpful.
And what do you think can be done or ought to be done about this cherry-picking tendency?
There has to be more oversight within this business, and the best placed individuals to provide the right level of scrutiny are existing and previous postmasters, because they understand the business.
Could we then go, and that brings me on to the next topic I wanted to address with you, could we then go to POL 00448394, please? This is, while we're waiting for it to come up, an email from Elliot Jacobs to you, dated the 28th of May 2024, and Nigel Railton is also copied in, and it's entitled Discussion Document. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, this was a discussion document that I did.
Yeah.
And for me, it was my views to set the new chair up for success.
And it's helpful because it follows on from what you've just been saying, because you say that this captures your thinking and aims for the future, particularly after some of the evidence from the former chief executive that was given in the inquiry. And just looking at the second paragraph, you say that that there should be a committee called the PM Advisory Committee, and this committee should have a clear mandate and terms of reference, bring together voices from across the postmaster community, meet 4 to 6 times a year, and aim to educate and guide senior poll members on the impact of proposals and strategies. What members do you have in mind?
Proactive postmasters, so obviously groups who represent postmasters. This organisation is such a fascinating and fantastic institution. It has a wide range of stakeholders, but I don't feel having every single stakeholder on the Postmaster Advisory or Postmaster Council, whatever we want to call it, is helpful, because, as I've said previously, making decisions and it is very difficult. The lack of pace within the organisation is clearly evident, and we don't want to do any more to jeopardise any further lack of pace and decision making. So producing a specific committee with individuals where accountability can be made for specific projects, I think is really, really important and the way forward.
Okay, thank you. And which senior post office officials ought to be informed or educated by this committee?
So for me, maybe I should have been a little bit clearer. I feel it's important for the senior individuals to be on the committee as well.
I see.
To connect better. There's no point having a committee without these individuals, because whatever's discussed then can't be implemented. So, for example, the chief finance officer, the CEO, the chief retail officer, these individuals would be on this type of committee. And in currently, with the scenario that we're in, the transformation officer as well would be important.
And your proposal is that, reading through the document, it should have the authority to call upon senior poll members to explain and challenge what is working and what is not. You're talking about senior executive members who would be invited to come and be challenged.
Correct. Held to account.
Held to account. And you also say it should also provide some overwatch on postmaster investigations. Just on that point, you've told us yesterday that investigations have been rebranded branch assurance visits. Is that right?
Yes.
And that there are difficulties with the postmasters that are ongoing in relation to understanding data. Individuals until recently weren't allowed representation.
Yes.
And you talk about the business being the victim investigator, so it's not neutral, and problems with tonality. Do you think that this sort of oversight by an advisory committee would resolve these issues?
I think there's different strands to that. Firstly, it's got to be an external external body that does investigations.
Right.
Because I, for one, don't have the confidence especially after what I've been cited on within the internal post office investigations and legal team for a fair hearing, number one. Number two, the advantage this oversight brings is there's certain situations that can happen in a post office branch. For example, a customer comes to the counter to deposit £1,000 and to withdraw £1,000, and in error you press the deposit button. So I've given the customer £1,000 and I've deposited £1,000. This is a very easy mistake to make. The buttons look very similar and they're next to each other. Now, for a postmaster or a postmaster council advisory committee, if a postmaster explains that issue and they're an active live serving postmaster, they can understand that.
Yeah.
However, an external body may not necessarily grasp that as quickly in terms of how simple and an easy error it is to make.
Okay. So you think investigations should be conducted externally?
100%.
And there are 3 points that you raise at the conclusion. I think it's Mr. Jacobs who raises it, but you say that this is something that you put together.
The discussion document I put together.
Okay.
This was an email following on from my discussion document.
Well, one of the points that's made is the lack of automation is shocking, is what's said. Can you explain that problem and why is it shocking?
So we joined the board in June 21, and within a few months we made it very clear to the business that we need automation. Our costs are going through the roof. Our customer journeys are poor. They can be better. They should be better. The self-serving kiosks that we currently have are not good enough. They are not doing what they should in terms of the new QR codes. Some of them don't work. They were only processing old returns. And unfortunately, this was just ignored. And until October 23, when a paper was brought to the board by Martin Roberts regarding automation. And to be clear, this was done on the back of some of our strategic partners saying we may leave the relationship with the post office unless this issue is resolved. So the wider executive ignored the 2 postmaster NEDs who have been requesting this and information about this and some kind of innovation to help ease customer journey. However, when it came to strategic partners, they were keen to start the conversation.
Right. Okay. You talk about a point of candour.
Yes.
To what extent does the board lack candour? Is that the point?
I think that's more from my observations based on the testimony of Paula Venables and what she was mentioning. And again, for me as an NED, being proactive in trying to make this organisation better, hence why I mention that point.
Okay. I just want a quick query. You mentioned strategic partners. Just can you confirm what that means?
So strategic partners are organisations such as WH Smith's, Morrison's, Cooperative, ASDA, organisations who have a large number of branches with us. And again, it's in my evidence where a survey was conducted of strategic partners and also of postmasters, which was brought to the July 24 board meeting. Yes. And again, the like-for-like comparison was not helpful. There were approximately just under 200 strategic partners interviewed, whereas over 1,000 postmasters interviewed. And the image and the narrative being portrayed by the retail team was, here, look here, the strategic partners are very happy, but these postmasters are not. And then it was only once there was some scrutiny by the board, which is then clarity was provided in terms of numbers. And again, just to add a point onto semi-related to automation, up until Andrew Dalfour mentioned about a digital strategy last year, the post office did not have a clear digital strategy, which was disappointing.
That's helpful. And finally, you say the lack of corporate memory is a major problem, cited by the former Chief Executive too, Venables, and still a lesson unlearned. And it goes on to say, we risk losing the learnings and experience in the desire to replace positive challenge. No NEDs other than Saf and Elliott in situ, with many not looking to do a second term. Are you saying that there should be an element of continuity so that this committee isn't just for a fixed term and then they all change?
Sorry, if you can just repeat the question.
Are you saying that the committee needs to have people on it that are long-standing members? So
the advisory committee. Yeah. So again, I'm not saying someone should be a permanent fixture, not at all. However, in order to, it's clear what the inquiry has produced some clear issues that this organisation has, and one of them is imbalance of power. Another is materiality in relation to postmasters. But the other, regards to the post office's corporate memory. And in order to move forward, move on, and as my mum would say to me, be a better person today than you were yesterday, in order to do that for this organisation, we have to learn from the lack of corporate memory that we have. And for me, not having individuals in place who are aware of what's happened in the past, even in the short term, over the last few years, not having that kind of continuity is very disappointing, because I can't see how we can learn from the past if we don't have that.
And my final point is, I understand that you presented this proposal to the board, is that right?
I provided this discussion document to the chair, and then it was in the chair's hands, and I'm not sure whether the chair has presented it or not, but for me, it was my duty to set the chair up for success, hence.
So is it your evidence that this hasn't been responded to yet?
We've had a discussion. I have had a discussion, and so did Mr. Jacobs, regarding this document, and the response that I received from Mr. Ailton was the strategic review will be addressing these points. So again, it's premature for me to say whether each point's been addressed yet.
Thank you. I just need to check if I have any more questions for you. I haven't. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it, Mr. Blake?
Yes, unless you have any questions, sir.
No, thank you. Well, actually, just one. I've understood that there are, in round figures, 11,500 branches. That's a goal, I think, that the government set. When the survey was sent out, it was sent out to approximately 6,500 postmasters or sub-postmasters. Can I take it that the reason for the difference is that there are some large partners like supermarkets, etc., who run many branches?
Yes, sir. But there was from what I have seen, and again, when the post office conducts internal surveys, they're promoted to be filled in and responded back to. Regarding your survey, the NFSP pushed your survey being filled, and so did the Voice of Postmaster. I didn't see...
No, I wasn't asking that.
Okay.
At first sight, it seemed a little unusual that there were 6,500 postmasters, but 11,500 branches. And I was simply, I think, understanding that that's because many of the branches are run by large organizations.
Yes, sir, but there are also postmasters with multiple branches also. So again,
right. So that's the reason.
Yes, and from my experience, the number of postmasters is approximately 7,000. So you weren't that far off.
Thank you. Well, we'll end on that happy note, Mr. Ismail. Thank you very much for making a very detailed witness statement and for giving evidence both yesterday and today. I'm grateful to you.
Thank you, sir.
Can we come back at 10 to 2, please, sir?
Well, I was going to ask you, are we managing the time for Mr. Elliott this afternoon? I mean, that's still giving us an hour for lunch, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, good.
Thank you.